Welcome to the welcome to the Time to Grow Up Dad podcast with your host Chong. And before we proceed into today's reflective episode, I do want to say happy holidays to everyone who is listening. I do think if I've done this correctly, I have scheduled this to come out just a week for Christmas or the week after Christmas, something along those lines. So hopefully the holiday season is treating you guys well. And one of the big things I do also want to kind of talk about here is that the support for the podcast has been really, really great. I don't know how I was able to keep this up, this consistent, churning out these mini episodes thus far, and I was actually quite surprised with myself to be able to do this for such a long time. And so hopefully, I will have a little bit more guests lined up for next year, more interesting conversations, and we'll see how long I can keep this going. So a reflective podcast today, a short one, because I'm sure you've got things to do, particularly going into this holiday period. The conversation I had with Mr. Steve Kwan from BJJ Mentor Models, and man, it was such a refreshing conversation. It almost sounds quite cult-like because I've been personally going down this whole Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rabbit hole, and like we sort of spoke about in our conversation, there's a lot of parallels that run alongside each other, BJJ and parenting. And one of the big things that we sort of talked about is about frames. So for those who don't understand what that is, maybe you don't understand what a frame is, but in a grappling sport or a grappling type of martial art, or even in a striking form of martial art like boxing and stuff like that, there's a thing called distance management. And essentially, if someone gets too close to you, you would either get punched out or get injured in some way, shape, or form. And so, a frame or sometimes a jab in terms of a fight sport is allowing you to kind of keep distance. Now, it's important from the offensive standpoint, though, when the frame is being put up, that you don't just want to run into the frame. You don't just want to run into a jab. Very much so when someone in BJJ is putting up a frame, like a forearm, right up your throat, you don't just want to jam your throat into your forearm because it's a frame, it's uncomfortable. You want to work around the frame. You want to be fluid, and you want to kind of either deflect the frame or go around the frame. You'd never really want to go through the frame. And that's such a big thing when it comes to parenting, because the reality is that your kid and kids will put up various types of resistances, various types of challenges. And for the most part, you don't want to hit those resistances head on. And I think, like, for example, if your child says they don't want to go to the park today, and you're gritting down and say, we're going to the park, and you're being really hard with them, maybe it works for once or twice, but if that's a consistent thing, you're potentially going to risk that relationship, because all they might think about is, the park is this place that I don't really want to and I'm being forced to go to. They never really want to go to the park. Something else as well with parenting, for example, if a kid is resisting something like a nap or resisting to eat, forcing them to sleep or forcing them to eat is never really going to pan out the way that you want it to pan out. And it's such a cool thing that we see that in parenting, but we also see that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you're trying to go past into a frame, you have to kind of work around it rather than tackle it head on. So that was actually the first thing that came to mind. Another thing that Steve was sort of talking about, and I think it's a very similar trend to all the other conversations I had with all the parents so far, Jenny, Dean, Adam, all these cool people, just to name a few, is that whatever that you do as a parent, your kids will take interests. And in that conversation I had with Steve, his daughter took interest up in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was not forced upon. It was just something that she knew that Steve and his brother, Matt, both do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she was interested. And I think it's something that is a very big takeaway from me, and why I keep sort of insisting to go to the gym, to go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to eat as good as I can, not because I enjoy these things. Well, I certainly do. A bigger part of that, and working hard and all that good stuff, the bigger part of that as well is setting that example. Getting Henry and the future boy, as of this recording, we don't know the name yet officially, to take interest into what I'm doing. And if I'm doing certain things that generally benefit myself and society, do good and all that stuff, hopefully my kids will take interest. And it takes me back to when my parents do something like charity work. I was not forced to do charity work, but they always do charity work, and I always took an interest to it, and I like doing charity work. Another example would be my dad. Actually, my dad used to go out for exercises and stuff like that, and he never actually pressured me into doing anything. But I remember at some point he brought me along to a gym. We had a gym in a condominium complex, and that was actually my first time being exposed to a gym. I never really understood it, but one day I saw him go in there. I was curious. I went in with him, and kind of the rest is history, right? So lead by example, and kids get curious. Kids will want to do things that parents do, and not to bag on any parents out there, because I'm sure all parents have struggles. Uh, Funnily enough, as of this recording, I actually just talked to an acquaintance or a friend or whatever we want to call it these days, and they're working with this client who is a 6-year-old child and morbidly obese. Right, we're talking like 6-year-old with a BMI of like 50. That's really really bad for context sake. And this kid's parents is not living a very healthy life as well. And one thing that we were sort of having the conversation back and forth was that the parents need to show up. The parents need to be the role model, again, lead by example so that the kids can follow through. We can't really force kids to do things, because most of the time, I think, at least, the best way to get a kid to do something is if we do the thing consistently, they will pick it up. And my experience with this is using a spoon, drinking out of a water bottle. We never really taught Henry how to do these things, but the more we did it, the more he's a very observant kid. The more he observes, the more he does those things too. So that was another takeaway from the conversation. And one final thing, again, I want to kind of keep this short because I'm sure everyone has things to do in this holiday season. Why are you listening to this? This is weird. Is taking um, don't make parenting your entire life. And that was a very good takeaway from someone like Steve, who's obviously a black belt in his own right, and essentially works in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu industry. And the question that I posed to him was, I've got a second kid coming, what should I do? I don't want to stop training, but I understand priorities gets in the way, I'm a parent. And he said something along the lines of, don't make parenting, I'm paraphrasing, don't make parenting your entire identity. Yes, being a parent is very important. Yes, being a good father, being a good mother, being a good role model is important. But there's also things outside of that you should also do to fill your own bucket. Again, paraphrasing here. And that is so true. I think sort of reflecting on the last couple of months, like a lot of my train of thought was like, I need to be the best friend. I need to be the best friend. I need to be the best friend. And I've almost felt like that consumed me a little bit, and I think a little bit too much. And when Steve brought that up, my mind just went like, oh shit, actually that's me. And that's actually kind of true. And then again, in retrospect, if I'm so focused on being the best dad, and there's nothing wrong, of course, being the best dad, being the best parent, don't get me wrong, but if my whole entire life purpose is literally just to be the best parent, and everything is that, and I'm giving up hobbies, I'm giving up things that I like, I'm not making compensation somewhere along the lines, I am not making some small sacrifice. I feel like when they turn 18 and when they inevitably move out of the nest, I feel like at that point, because if I'm so focused on trying to be the best parent I can be, I might potentially lose my identity when they inevitably leave the nest. So I don't know if that even makes sense, but the way I interpreted what Steve said was, it's not that you don't want to be a good parent. Of course you want to be the best parent that you can be, But there's also things where you understand that sometimes you might have to stop going to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for a while. You might have to potentially stop lifting. And that was actually what happened to me when Henry was born. Like my lifting was so sporadic. It was 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week tops. Very unlike me. But you'll get back into it. And don't you worry, because those things will inevitably come back into your life. But don't make parenting the be all end all. And I think as a dad, as a male, I think that's a little bit easier to kind of stomach. Again, like patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, but it feels like it's a little bit easier to stomach because like I'm not the one consistently looking after my two kids, right? Claire, we've made the decision that Claire will be looking after the kids full time, and so it's a lot easier for me to go, like you look after them, I'll come when I can, kind of thing. But I think it's also important to understand, like, yeah, it's just that whole idea. It's important to be a parent, but don't let it be the over. Don't let it be your only one sole identity. Have other identities behind that too. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully everyone is having a good one. I'm not sure when the next episode will be coming out, but it will definitely be within the next 2 weeks or so. Hope you guys enjoy. Thanks for the support and love everyone. And happy holidays and happy new year.